The frontman of the 1970s disco supergroup Boney M has died at the age of 61.
The music world is mourning the death of Bobby Farrell.
In the 1960s, Bob Crane had everything an actor could hope for. With his perfect smile and quick wit, he won over audiences as Colonel Robert Hogan, the clever leader in the hit sitcom Hogan's Heroes. Off-screen, he was equally charming, known for his sharp humor and warm personality. But while the world saw him as the affable television star behind the scenes, his life was unraveling in ways few could imagine. What began as a career built on laughter would end in betrayal, scandal, and a brutal death that left more questions than answers. The rise of a star. Before television stardom, Bob Crane had already built a name for himself on the radio in Los Angeles. Known as the Man of 1,000 Voices, he hosted a popular morning show on KNX where he interviewed celebrities like Marilyn Monroe, Bob Hope, and Charlton Heston. His quick improvisation and natural confidence made him a favorite among Hollywood's elite. Even Walt Disney once called him the fastest wit in the West. His success on radio led him into acting. In 1961, legendary TV writer Carl Reiner appeared on Crane's radio program and later offered him a guest spot on The Dick Van Dyke Show as a philandering husband. That single role opened the door to more opportunities, including a regular part as a happy-go-lucky dentist on The Donna Reed Show. By 1965, Crane's agent sent him the script for a new television project called Hogan's Heroes. At first, he thought it was a war drama, not realizing it was a comedy about Allied prisoners of war constantly outsmarting their bumbling German captors. Despite the unusual premise, Hogan's Heroes became a massive success. Crane's portrayal of Colonel Robert Hogan made him a household name. The show ran for 6 seasons, from 1965 to 1971, earning him 2 Emmy nominations and turning him into one of television's most recognizable stars. His face appeared on billboards, lunchboxes, and magazines across the country. For millions of viewers, he was the smiling, clever leader who always had a plan. On screen, Crane was living the dream. But even at the height of his fame, those close to him began noticing changes. His personal life became strained, his appetite for excitement grew, and his behavior off-camera hinted at an obsession that would slowly consume him. For now, though, the world only saw the laughter, the secret double life. Behind the smile and charm that made Bob Crane a household name, there was a very different reality unfolding. In the mid-1960s, his interest in photography began shifting into something more personal. At first, he simply enjoyed experimenting with cameras, taking portraits, and testing new video equipment. But gradually, the camera became more than a hobby. It turned into a central part of his private world. The turning point came when his Hogan's Heroes co-star, Richard Dawson, introduced him to John Henry Carpenter, a video equipment salesman for Sony Electronics. Carpenter was well connected in Hollywood and provided Crane with access to the latest technology. The two quickly became friends, bonding over their shared interest in recording equipment. Carpenter even helped him set up devices in hotels while they were on the road. What started as a friendship built on curiosity eventually led to behavior that troubled those who knew Crane best. Together, they began frequenting bars and nightclubs, where Crane's celebrity status drew plenty of attention. He often introduced Carpenter as his manager, and the pair became inseparable, traveling together and spending countless hours experimenting with new gadgets. While some saw this as harmless fun, others were disturbed by how dependent Crane seemed on his constant filming. Colleagues noticed he was becoming distracted, more preoccupied with his side hobby than with the work that had once defined him. The strain spilled into his personal life. His marriage to Ann Terzian, his high school sweetheart and the mother of his 3 children, ended in divorce after more than 2 decades. He later married Patricia Olson, known to viewers of Hogan's Heroes as Sigrid Valdis, but the same issues followed him. Even during the filming of Disney's 1973 family movie Superdad, Crane's behavior off-set was reported to have raised concerns among executives, hurting his reputation in the industry. By the late 1970s, Crane was no longer the television star he had once been. He found steady work in stage productions and seemed determined to rebuild his career. At the same time, however, his friendship with Carpenter had become a source of tension. Crane confided to friends that he wanted to move on, to leave behind old habits and start fresh. But by the summer of 1978, it was already too late. The murder in Scottsdale. By June 1978, Bob Crane was living in Scottsdale, Arizona, performing in a stage comedy called Beginner's Luck at the Windmill Dinner Theater. At 49 years old, just 2 weeks away from his 50th birthday, he seemed determined to change course. Friends later recalled that he had spoken about divorcing Patricia Olson and ending his friendship with John Carpenter. He wanted to wipe the slate clean. But before he could take that step, his life came to a sudden and tragic end. On the afternoon of June 29th, co-star Victoria Ann Barry went to check on Crane after he failed to appear for a lunch meeting. Inside his apartment at Winfield Place, she found a scene that would haunt Hollywood for decades. Crane was discovered lifeless in his bed. The injuries to his head were severe, and investigators believe the object used may have been a camera tripod. An electrical cord was also found near him, though it was not the cause of death. What unsettled detectives most was how little disturbance there was in the room. Nothing had been stolen, and there were no signs of forced entry. Whoever was responsible was someone Crane trusted enough to let inside, or perhaps someone who entered while he slept. That narrow circle of suspects quickly pointed toward John Carpenter. He had flown into Phoenix just days earlier to spend time with Crane. The two had dinner the night before, and according to reports, even watched some of their private recordings together. Carpenter claimed he returned to his own motel afterward, but witnesses later contradicted his timeline. The crime scene also revealed a hidden side of Crane's personal life. Police found cameras, tripods, tapes, and cables throughout the apartment, filled with recordings that shocked the public. The beloved star of Hogan's Heroes was suddenly recast in headlines as a man battling private struggles. For his family, the discovery was devastating. For investigators, it became both a clue and a distraction. The equipment tied Crane's private world directly to Carpenter, but the sensational nature of the evidence complicated the search for truth. What was clear from the very beginning, however, was that this was no random break-in. It was personal. The investigation and trial. The Scottsdale Police Department was not fully prepared to handle a major case in 1978. They had no specialized homicide division, and errors at the crime scene would trouble investigators for decades. Detectives collected tapes, photographs, and recording equipment from Crane's apartment, but the handling of evidence was inconsistent. Friends and even family members, including Crane's eldest son Robert, were allowed to enter the apartment before it was properly secured, leaving behind fingerprints, hair, and footprints that further complicated the scene. Despite these issues, suspicion soon centered on John Carpenter. He had been staying nearby, had spent time with Crane the night before, and his rental car contained smears of blood that matched Crane's type. At the time, DNA testing was not yet available, and blood typing alone was not enough to prove guilt. Without a clear weapon or fingerprints, the Maricopa County District Attorney declined to file charges. Carpenter returned to Los Angeles, but his reputation was permanently damaged. For more than 10 years, the case went quiet. Then, in 1990, investigators Barry Vassell and Jim Raines reopened the files. New advances in DNA testing gave them hope. They reviewed the evidence and discovered an old photograph of Carpenter's car interior that appeared to show a biological fragment. The original samples had been lost, but the discovery was enough for prosecutors to move forward. In 1992, John Carpenter was arrested and formally charged in connection with Crane's death. The trial, which began in 1994, played out like a courtroom drama. The prosecution argued that Carpenter, upset over Crane's decision to end their friendship, had acted out of anger. They presented the blood evidence, the history between the two men, and testimony from Crane's son Scotty, who said his father had repeatedly spoken about cutting Carpenter out of his life. The defense responded by questioning the reliability of the evidence. They highlighted that the key biological sample was missing, that the crime scene had been poorly preserved, and that the tripod theory was pure speculation. They also pointed to the possibility of other suspects, such as people who may have held grudges against Crane. After weeks of testimony, the jury was not persuaded. In 1994, John Carpenter was acquitted. He maintained his innocence until his passing in 1998. Officially, the case returned to the cold files, still unresolved and unfinished. The family's struggle and the legacy of scandal. For Bob Crane's children, the trial brought no peace. His eldest son, Robert, described how painful it was to watch the most personal details of his father's life turned into a public spectacle. The courtroom was filled with testimony and evidence that shifted attention away from Crane's decades of work in radio and television. Instead of bringing answers, the trial left his family with more questions and a lasting sense of hurt. Robert David Crane, another of his sons, later spoke about his suspicion that Patricia Olson, Crane's second wife, known on screen as Sigrid Valdis, may have had a deeper connection to events. He noted that Bob's will left his entire estate to Olson, excluding his children and first wife. "Nobody got anything out of this except for one person," Robert David said. Prosecutors never considered Olson a suspect, but the speculation added another layer of bitterness to the family's grief. Crane's son Scotty also struggled with how his father was portrayed. He maintained that those who appeared in the recordings were willing participants, but media coverage rarely showed nuance. Headlines painted Crane as a fallen star consumed by controversy, overshadowing his reputation as a pioneering radio host and Emmy-nominated actor. What he accomplished on stage and screen was drowned out by the darker aspects of his story. The funeral in July 1978 had shown just how loved Crane was in Hollywood. Around 200 mourners, including stars like Patty Duke, Carol O'Connor, and John Astin, came to St. Paul the Apostle Church in Los Angeles to pay their respects. His co-stars from Hogan's Heroes served as pallbearers. Yet in the years that followed, Hollywood seemed to quietly step away. Reruns of Hogan's Heroes declined, and Crane's name was often whispered with controversy rather than celebrated for talent. For his family, this was the most painful cut of all. The man they knew was complex, flawed, yes, but also warm, funny, and gifted. Instead of being remembered for the joy he brought to millions, he was frozen in time as the subject of an unsolved case, his achievements buried beneath a cloud that never fully lifted. New DNA tests, Hollywood's memory, and the final tragedy. Even after John Carpenter's acquittal in 1994, the Scottsdale police and Maricopa County prosecutors continued to revisit Bob Crane's case. Technology was advancing, and there was hope that DNA could succeed where 1970s forensic methods had failed. In 2016, Phoenix television reporter John Hook received permission to retest the remaining blood samples taken from Carpenter's rental car. Using modern techniques, analysts found 2 male DNA sequences. One belonged to an unidentified man, while the other was too degraded to provide a conclusion. Crucially, the tests consumed all of the remaining material, making any further analysis impossible. The case once again returned to limbo. This result frustrated Crane's surviving family. His son Robert, who published Crane, Sex, Celebrity, and My Father's Unsolved Murder in 2015, admitted that closure would never come. He described living with his father's death as living in a constant fog. Scotty, meanwhile, pushed back against portrayals of his father in popular culture. When the 2002 film Autofocus depicted Crane in an exaggerated and sensational way, Scotty argued that it was inaccurate. He even created a website, bobcrane.com, to share documents and material that he felt showed a fuller, more balanced picture of his father's life. Yet the damage to Crane's reputation remained. Hollywood rarely mentions his name without a reminder of controversy. His greatest achievement, Hogan's Heroes, is almost always discussed in the same breath as his unsolved case. What was once a groundbreaking sitcom is now overshadowed by the mystery surrounding its star. For the public, Crane is not remembered primarily as the gifted improviser or the charismatic colonel, but as the man forever linked to an unfinished story. The tragedy is not only in how he died, but in how he is remembered. Bob Crane spent decades making people laugh, bringing humor to even the most unlikely settings, and earning admiration across the country. Yet, because of one night in Scottsdale and the revelations that followed, his entire legacy was rewritten. His case remains unsolved, his memory unsettled, and the final chapter of his life defined not by triumph, but by betrayal and sadness. Bob Crane's story is one of Hollywood's darkest tragedies. A man who made millions laugh on screen was ultimately undone by secrets he couldn't escape, and a crime that was never solved. Decades later, his family still searches for answers, but the truth may be gone forever. What do you think really happened in Scottsdale that night in 1978? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories.